They called it the Secret City, a town that wasn't on maps, whose very existence was hidden from the American public. Built in 1942 as part of the Manhattan Project, Oak Ridge, Tennessee, produced the enriched uranium that changed the course of history. But the story you know is only the surface. Beneath the factories, beyond the laboratories, and under the watchful eyes of military guards, Oak Ridge built something else, something still locked away. Rumors whisper of sealed vaults, lost shipments of uranium, and underground chambers humming with energy no one can explain. Contractors sign lifetime NDAs. Locals tell stories of convoys that vanish into hillsides, and government documents, heavily redacted, hint at projects so secret they weren't about building bombs, but burying something far older and far stranger. This isn't just history, it's an unfinished story. Because Oak Ridge may not just be America's nuclear birthplace, it may be a vault for something we were never meant to find. In 1942, while much of the nation was distracted by war headlines, an entire city sprang up almost overnight in the Tennessee Valley. Built in secrecy under the codename Clinton Engineering Works, Oak Ridge would eventually house more than 75,000 residents, scientists, engineers, factory workers, and soldiers, all sworn to silence. To outsiders, it was just another war plant. To insiders, it was the beating heart of the Manhattan Project. Here, inside sprawling complexes like Y12 and K25, uranium was enriched for the first atomic bombs. The city's purpose was clear: build a weapon that would end the war. But secrecy was more than policy, it was survival. Residents couldn't tell friends or family where they lived. Letters were censored. Cameras were banned. Oak Ridge didn't appear on maps until years after the war ended. And yet, even from its earliest days, there were whispers that Oak Ridge went deeper than anyone admitted. Construction records show foundations poured for auxiliary containment structures, yet no diagrams explain what they contained. Blueprints reveal staircases that lead nowhere, and corridors abruptly walled off. Even in the 1940s, entire sections of the complex were marked simply "restricted, no access." Some workers later recalled hearing a low hum beneath their dormitories at night, like turbines running below ground where no turbines were listed. Others spoke of convoys moving under cover of darkness, trucks entering hillside doors carved into bedrock. A few remembered guards with instructions not to stop vehicles marked only with stenciled letters, X12. The official story says Oak Ridge was built for one purpose: the bomb. But the secrecy was too thorough, the structures too extensive, and the records too carefully erased for that to be the whole truth. Even decades later, veterans of the project still describe Oak Ridge as a city above a city. The visible town was just the surface. Beneath it, they hint, lay the first layers of the Oak Ridge vaults, sealed chambers no one outside the highest circles of clearance would ever see. And as we follow the trail deeper, we'll discover that Oak Ridge's greatest secrets were never about uranium at all. On the surface, Oak Ridge's history seems well documented. Declassified files paint a picture of a city with one purpose: uranium enrichment. The Y12 plant refined U-235, the K25 gaseous diffusion facility expanded the output, and the S50 thermal plant provided the final push. These were feats of engineering that forever changed the world. But if Oak Ridge's mission was only the bomb, why do its archives read like a puzzle with missing pieces? Thousands of pages remain redacted even today, with entire projects blacked out under the phrase Vault Access. One curious example, a 1944 blueprint of Y12 includes a sub-basement floor labelled only Level D. Later re-releases of the same diagram erase Level D completely, as if it never existed. Another case. Construction supply orders list reinforced steel doors, seismic dampeners, and copper-lined chambers, yet no public record explains where these materials went. Historians dismiss these gaps as clerical errors, but whistleblowers insist they are deliberate. One retired Oak Ridge engineer claimed he worked on a containment vault in 1945, 40 feet below the enrichment floor. When asked what it contained, he paused and said, "Not uranium." Not anything you'd expect, even stranger, are the documents that hint at missing uranium shipments. Official records say Oak Ridge produced about 64 kilograms of enriched uranium for the Hiroshima bomb, but scattered memos mention additional shipments, sometimes labeled for vault allocation. Where those shipments went remains a mystery. If Oak Ridge was just a factory, why build vaults that no one admits exist? Why create levels erased from history? And why, to this day, do contractors still whisper about underground doors guarded by biometric scanners, decades before that technology was supposedly invented? Because Oak Ridge's official story is neat, clean, and patriotic, but the missing pages tell another tale, one where the most dangerous part of the Manhattan Project wasn't what we unleashed on the world, but what we buried beneath it. The Y-12 National Security Complex is remembered as the crown jewel of Oak Ridge, where uranium enrichment for the first atomic bomb reached its final stage. To this day, Y-12 remains one of the most heavily guarded facilities in the United States. But the real story, according to insiders, isn't what happened above ground, it's what was buried beneath. Declassified floor plans show Y-12 as a massive rectangle of concrete and machinery, yet workers speak of staircases that led down to the vaults, levels never shown on official maps. One former machinist recalled being escorted to a sub-basement where hallways ended at seamless steel doors. No hinges, no locks in, he said, just walls pretending not to be doors. Officially, these vaults were built to store enriched uranium ingots, but anomalies in shipping records raise questions. A 1945 ledger shows uranium delivered in excess of what was ever logged into production. Where did the surplus go? One memo, only partially unredacted, mentions allocation to containment. Containment of what? Then there are the disappearances. In 1952, 2 contractors working night shifts at Y-12 reportedly vanished inside a restricted corridor. Their lockers were emptied, their names erased from payroll, and their families quietly relocated out of Tennessee. No police report was filed. Radiation technicians also whispered of strange readings near sealed access points, meters spiking into the red before falling back to normal. Some described hearing a low-frequency vibration in those same hallways, like machinery running where no machinery should be. A particularly chilling detail comes from an engineer who said he once saw the inside of one vault during maintenance. He expected uranium storage racks. Instead, he claimed the chamber was empty, lined entirely with copper shielding, walls glistening with condensation. It wasn't a vault, he said, it was a cage. But the question is, for what? Y-12's vaults are officially described as secure storage for nuclear materials, but the patterns suggest otherwise. Missing uranium, sealed chambers, erased names, and the quiet hum of something still active beneath the factory floor. Perhaps the Oak Ridge vaults weren't meant to hold bombs. Perhaps they were meant to hold something we weren't supposed to unleash. The Manhattan Project demanded speed, secrecy, and precision. Every ounce of enriched uranium was logged, guarded, and accounted for. At least, that's what the official records claim. Yet buried inside Oak Ridge's own paperwork is a mystery no historian has ever resolved. Uranium that was produced but never officially used. In the summer of 1945, Oak Ridge delivered 64 kilograms of highly enriched uranium for the Hiroshima bomb. That figure has been repeated for decades in history books. But procurement ledgers from Y-12 tell another story. They list an additional 12 kilograms of U-235 shipped under vault allocation, a designation that appears nowhere else in the archives. Where did it go? The surplus was never mentioned in official after-action reports, never logged at Los Alamos, and never declassified. To this day, the shipment is missing. And this wasn't an isolated case. Throughout the late 1940s and 1950s, Oak Ridge shipped dozens of containers under mysterious project codes, X-12 and Vault Reserve, and containment allocation. The paperwork always ends the same way, delivered, but no recipient is named. Some researchers believe these shipments fed the Cold War arms race, quietly stockpiling uranium for weapons never acknowledged, but whistleblowers insist otherwise. One former logistics officer claimed the missing containers weren't weapons grade at all, but anomalous product. When asked to elaborate, he refused, saying only, it wasn't for bombs, it was for vaults. Adding fuel to the mystery, photographs from the 1950s show unmarked steel drums being lowered into sealed underground bays at Oak Ridge. The images were never meant for the public, they surfaced only after a failed FOIA redaction. The drums were larger than standard storage containers and stamped with a symbol not listed in any Manhattan Project glossary, a triangle within a circle. If uranium was going missing during the most tightly monitored project in American history, the implications are staggering. Either the government lost track of its deadliest material, or it was funneling it into programs we still know nothing about, and the pattern grows darker. Every missing shipment coincides with spikes in local radiation reports, sudden maintenance closures of Y-12 sublevels, and in one case, the disappearance of an entire convoy. The question is no longer just where did the uranium go? It's what was Oak Ridge building beneath its surface that required so much of it, and why was the public never told? The end of World War II did not end Oak Ridge's secrecy, it only deepened it. As the Cold War dawned, Oak Ridge shifted from wartime urgency to long-term containment. Officially, this meant producing more uranium and refining nuclear technology. Unofficially, it meant digging deeper, building new levels that were never meant to see daylight. Declassified Army Corps of Engineers files reveal deep shelter retrofits beneath Oak Ridge in the late 1940s. The language is vague, but blueprints show reinforced sublevels lined with copper mesh and seismic dampeners, technology normally reserved for hardened bunkers. One 1951 report even references continuity chambers designed to survive direct nuclear strikes. Yet Oak Ridge was already inland, safe from coastal attacks. Why build such extreme protections underground? Contractors from the 1950s later admitted that excavation crews were ordered to expand downward into pre-existing voids, caverns that seemed to exist before the drills touched stone. Some workers described finding smooth walls carved into the bedrock, as if someone else had been there long before. Instead of reporting these anomalies, the areas were simply sealed off and reclassified as containment vaults. Meanwhile, the Cold War obsession with secrecy created new opportunities for Oak Ridge. Federal budgets disguise billions under innocuous project names, infrastructure upgrades, maintenance allocations, subsurface retrofits. But line items don't explain why certain sublevels were completely erased from maps after being constructed. Whistleblowers claim these hidden levels weren't just for uranium or weapons, they were for continuity of government experiments. In the event of nuclear war, Oak Ridge could act as a fallback node, a command post hidden beneath layers of reinforced stone. Some allege it went further: underground hospitals, acoustic research chambers, even listening vaults meant to monitor low-frequency signals from beneath the earth. Locals began to notice strange patterns during this era. Nighttime convoys driving into unmarked hillside doors, helicopters circling at odd hours, and entire neighborhoods suddenly cut off under the excuse of drills. Residents whispered that Oak Ridge wasn't preparing for war, it was preparing for something far stranger, something it expected to emerge from below. By the 1960s, Oak Ridge wasn't just a city, it was a labyrinth. Its official map only the surface layer of a much deeper structure, and in that hidden structure, something was being stored, tested, or maybe even contained. By the mid-1960s, Oak Ridge had already become more than a factory town. It was a laboratory for secrecy itself. Among the strangest rumors to emerge from declassified fragments is something called Project Echo Chamber. Official documents on the project are scarce. The name survives only in a handful of redacted memos, each referencing auditory containment and low-frequency anomalies. Whatever echo chamber was, it wasn't about bombs, it was about sound. Former contractors described being led into underground chambers lined with foam and copper, rooms where no sound echoed, no matter how loud you shouted. These listening rooms were supposedly designed to test how vibrations traveled through the sublevels. But some claim the real goal was to isolate a different kind of sound, one not made by human machinery. Technicians reported hearing rhythmic pulses beneath the floors, like machinery running far below the known sublevels. Others spoke of voices in delay, where words they spoke repeated back seconds later, slightly altered, as if something was trying to imitate human speech. One particularly chilling account comes from a worker who said he monitored an infrasound test inside one of the vaults. At first, the speakers produced nothing audible. Then his instruments picked up a low vibration. When amplified, the signal wasn't random noise. It was structured like a pattern. Some believed it was a code. The worker described it as a language made of echoes. He quit the next day. The official explanation? Geological resonance, limestone caverns, steel reinforcements, and machinery combining to create strange feedback loops. But if that were true, why were entire sublevels sealed after the experiments ended? Why did radiation reports spike in the same corridors where the echoes were heard? Rumors suggest Project Echo Chamber was eventually abandoned because it didn't just detect signals, it attracted them. Several technicians allegedly fell ill after prolonged exposure, reporting headaches, disorientation, and vivid hallucinations of tunnels shifting and doors appearing where none existed. Oak Ridge called it a failed experiment, but the vaults where it happened were never reopened. And somewhere in the archives, a memo survives with one chilling line: "Do not pursue unidentified sounds beyond clearance radius." Every secret city carries a human cost. At Oak Ridge, that cost may have been higher than anyone was willing to admit. Hidden among employment records, union rosters, and declassified files are hints of something disturbing: people who vanished. Officially, Oak Ridge employed tens of thousands during the Manhattan Project and into the Cold War. Workers rotated in and out, bound by silence. But families of certain contractors began to notice something strange: relatives who went into restricted areas and never came back. In some cases, their names disappeared from payroll overnight, their housing reassigned within days. It was as if they had never existed at all. In 1952, 2 men assigned to maintenance in Y12's sub-basement were reported missing by co-workers. No police investigation followed. Instead, their personnel files were stamped terminated and locked away. Their families were relocated out of Tennessee under federal reassignment. Another case surfaced in 1967, when a young engineer told friends he had been chosen to inspect one of Oak Ridge's deep vaults. He joked that he was going down where the maps don't go. He was never seen again. The official report said he was transferred overseas. His wife received a final paycheck and nothing else. The stories repeat: a janitor who filed a complaint about a humming vault and was gone within a month. A radiation tech who told co-workers his counter spiked near sealed doors before disappearing. Even into the 1980s, whispers persisted of subcontractors who went into the vaults and never came out. Were these simply cases of reassignment, relocation, and secrecy gone too far? Or did the Oak Ridge vaults swallow people who knew too much, or got too close to whatever was really hidden? A declassified memo from 1974 offers one unsettling clue. It mentions operational losses in restricted sublevels, noting that civilian inquiries must be neutralized. Losses. Not accidents, not deaths, just losses. Oak Ridge built its reputation on silence. But sometimes silence doesn't mean nothing happened. Sometimes it means too much happened, and no one was meant to remember. If Oak Ridge was built to refine uranium, why were entire chambers dedicated to silence? Buried in the testimonies of former contractors are accounts of so-called listening rooms. These rooms weren't labs, offices, or storage bays. They were strange, acoustically perfect chambers, sealed in concrete, lined with copper mesh, padded with thick sound-dampening panels. Inside them, you could scream and hear nothing bounce back. No echo, no return. Just silence that pressed against you like a weight. The official explanation was that these were testing facilities for acoustic insulation. But workers assigned to clean them noticed something odd. The silence wasn't stable. On certain nights, they swore they could hear faint tapping from beneath the floors, like knuckles rapping on metal. Others said they heard whispers repeating their words with slight distortion, as if something was copying them, trying to get the pronunciation right. One whistleblower recalled entering a listening room in the 1970s during a late-night maintenance check. At first, he thought the place was empty, but when he turned off his flashlight, he swore he could hear breathing, not his own, not in rhythm with him, but slower, heavier. He never went back. Declassified documents reference auditory interference phenomena in Oak Ridge facilities, recommending certain vaults be sealed entirely. Yet some listening rooms remained active into the 1980s, allegedly used for experiments in low-frequency transmissions. Why hide acoustic experiments in a nuclear city? Some theorists believe Oak Ridge wasn't just monitoring uranium, it was monitoring the ground itself. Seismic sensors picked up strange vibrations that didn't match natural quakes or machinery. It was as if something beneath the city was producing signals of its own. One chilling memo suggested these rooms weren't for listening to us at all. They were built so something beneath couldn't listen to them. In 2004, a Freedom of Information Act release included a cache of Oak Ridge archival documents. Most were routine: supply orders, maintenance reports, budget requests. But buried among them was a strange anomaly, a file stamped non-human directive. Almost the entire page was blacked out. Only a few words remained: containment vault, behavioral anomaly, and directive compliance. The phrasing was unusual. Oak Ridge was a nuclear site, not a behavioral lab. What kind of anomaly required a directive labelled non-human? Researchers who saw the file believe it wasn't about animals. Oak Ridge had labs for biological testing, but those fell under different codes. Non-human directive implied something outside known categories, something that wasn't supposed to exist. Whistleblowers later claimed Oak Ridge vaults stored more than uranium. They spoke of sealed chambers holding objects retrieved during excavation, structures too symmetrical to be natural, too alien to be man-made. One technician described seeing a metallic sphere locked in a copper-lined vault. It hummed, he said, like it was alive, but waiting. Others tell of crates arriving at Oak Ridge from unknown locations. The containers were unmarked, but guards treated them with the same urgency as nuclear material. One worker recalled hearing a supervisor whisper, "Not weapons," directive speculation spread. Was Oak Ridge hiding artifacts? Unknown technology? Something unearthed during excavation that couldn't be explained? The files don't give answers, but one fragment does. In a heavily redacted transcript, a project lead states, "Non-human directive remains active. Compliance necessary." What does it mean to comply with something non-human? Was Oak Ridge receiving instructions or carrying them out? And if these vaults weren't just built to contain uranium, but something other, something never meant to be here, then Oak Ridge isn't just America's nuclear city, it's a liaison between us and something else. If Oak Ridge was only about uranium, its supply lines should have been simple: trucks hauling ore, shipments of equipment, and security escorts. But witnesses across Tennessee tell of something stranger: convoys that appeared without warning, traveled at night, and seemed to vanish without trace. Locals first noticed them in the late 1940s. Lines of unmarked trucks, escorted by jeeps with blackout lights, moving down rural roads at 2 a.m. Some residents recalled being stopped by MPs and ordered to turn around. The convoys never appeared in local newspapers, and their cargo was always hidden under heavy tarps. Former workers claimed the trucks didn't always head into Oak Ridge proper. Instead, they diverted to remote hillside entrances, camouflaged doors carved into the Tennessee bedrock. Once inside, the trucks never re-emerged. Witnesses swore they heard the doors slam shut behind them, leaving only silence. Even stranger, there were reports of convoys that started at Oak Ridge and simply disappeared. One whistleblower, a driver in the 1950s, said his team was ordered to deliver sealed crates to a sub-level entrance. He followed the convoy to a gate, passed through security and into a tunnel. The headlights ahead of him flickered. When he reached the far side, the trucks in front of him were gone. Only empty road remained. He refused to speak about it again. Military records offer no explanation, but one redacted report from 1962 mentions ghost allocations tied to Oak Ridge logistics. Another uses the term phantom delivery. No details survive. What were these convoys carrying? Some believe it was simply uranium moved under maximum secrecy. Others argue they hauled unknown materials, artifacts, objects, or something too dangerous to store anywhere else. But if the rumors are true, that convoys entered tunnels and never returned, then Oak Ridge wasn't just storing secrets underground, it was swallowing them. Radiation was always part of life at Oak Ridge. Workers wore badges, dosimeters, and protective suits. But beneath the official safety reports lie stories of readings that defy explanation, pockets of radiation appearing where no uranium was ever stored. Former technicians described how their Geiger counters would suddenly spike near sealed vault doors. At times, the readings were so strong they briefly maxed out the dial, only to fall back to normal seconds later, as if the radiation pulsed in waves. It was like something was breathing, one worker recalled. More disturbing were the so-called radiation shadows. In several incidents, technicians reported faint silhouettes on concrete walls, outlines of figures burned in by radiation bursts, but without any documented accident to explain them. These shapes didn't match equipment or machinery. They looked human. One whistleblower claimed he saw a shadow in a sealed sublevel that shouldn't have been accessed in decades. It wasn't just a stain, he said. It was a person, frozen in time. Oak Ridge safety reports confirm anomalies, but dismiss them as instrument malfunction. Yet handwritten notes in the margins tell a different story. Shadows increasing, vault proximity suspected. Even more chilling, locals near Oak Ridge remember nights when their animals grew restless, barking at nothing. Farmers claimed their cows refused to graze near certain fence lines, as if sensing something invisible in the soil. Radiation surveys conducted later found inexplicable hotspots deep in the woods, miles from any official facility. If these shadows were real, they suggest something terrifying. Bursts of energy escaping from vaults built to contain the unknown. Radiation doesn't just appear out of nowhere. It comes from a source. And if the Oak Ridge vaults were that source, then the question isn't just what they built down there, but whether they could control it. Tennessee is not known for major earthquakes. Small tremors happen, but nothing on the scale of California or Alaska. Yet Oak Ridge has experienced a strange history of localized seismic events, shaking felt only within a few miles of the facility, sometimes only inside the facility itself. The first reports date back to 1944, when workers in the Y12 plant described the floor suddenly vibrating, equipment rattling as if struck by a wave. Seismographs in nearby towns registered nothing. The tremor existed only within Oak Ridge. Through the 1950s and 60s, similar incidents continued. Declassified logs reference microseismic anomalies coinciding with vault construction. Some events were so strong they cracked pipes and shifted foundation beams. But when the US Geological Survey was consulted, they found no fault lines or tectonic cores. Whistleblowers suggest these were not natural earthquakes but containment breaches. Vaults buried deep beneath Oak Ridge were supposedly designed to hold more than uranium. They were built to restrain forces we don't fully understand. When those forces pressed against their cages, the surface shook. One engineer recalled a 1973 incident where a sealed sublevel vibrated so violently that dust poured from the ceilings above. It felt alive, he said, like something was moving under the floor. The official explanation? A steam pipe rupture. Yet no broken pipes were ever found. Even stranger, locals remember nights when their windows rattled, but only in certain neighborhoods. One farmer said it felt like the ground groaned. Another claimed he saw a faint glow rising from the woods near the complex the same night his house shook. A redacted Department of Energy memo from 1981 mentions vault pressure events requiring emergency stabilization. No further details were released, but the phrasing implies the earthquakes weren't random. They were reactions. If Oak Ridge's vaults were built to contain something alive, or something active, then the tremors weren't accidents of geology. They were warnings. Officially, Oak Ridge was one of the most heavily monitored facilities in America. Power systems, emergency sirens, and backup generators ensured nothing interrupted its operations. But buried in testimony from former workers are chilling accounts of planned blackouts, moments when the entire facility went dark, not by accident, but by design. The drills were never announced to staff in advance. Suddenly, without warning, the power would cut. Machines would grind to a halt, lights would flicker out, and the only illumination came from the dim glow of emergency bulbs. Security officers with flashlights would appear, ordering workers to stay in place. Doors locked automatically. Movement was restricted. What were they testing? The official line called these containment readiness exercises meant to simulate power failure during wartime. But multiple witnesses insist the drills weren't tests. They were responses. One technician recalled being trapped in a sub-level corridor during a blackout in 1964. It wasn't just the lights, he said, it was the sound. Everything went quiet, too quiet. Then I felt it, something moving behind the walls like it had been waiting for the power to drop. Another worker claimed that after a blackout drill in 1972, he saw guards escorting a stretcher out of a sealed section. The sheet covering the body looked burned, not by fire but by radiation. No report was ever filed. Even residents outside Oak Ridge noticed. On blackout nights, the city's skyline dimmed completely, as if swallowed by shadow. Dogs barked, birds fled the trees, and sometimes people swore they heard a low, droning hum carried on the night air. A declassified emergency protocol from 1985 may offer a clue. It states, during blackout phase, maintain vault isolation. Do not permit exposure to unfiltered light. Why would light matter, unless what was contained in those vaults reacted not just to power, but to illumination itself? Oak Ridge wasn't just about enrichment. It was also home to some of America's earliest nuclear reactors. The X-10 graphite reactor, built in 1943, was the first reactor designed for continuous plutonium production. It was an engineering marvel and a mystery magnet. Officially, X-10 was decommissioned in 1963. But former technicians tell a different story. They claim the reactor kept humming long after its shutdown, powered on in secret for special projects. What those projects were has never been explained. One retired engineer described monitoring the core during a midnight shift in 1958. Instead of the steady hum of fission, he heard irregular pulses, almost like a heartbeat. Instruments recorded energy spikes that didn't match uranium decay. When he asked a supervisor, he was told, "That's not the reactor. That's what we're keeping it running for." Other anomalies surfaced in the records. Cooling pools occasionally glowed with colors not seen in Cherenkov radiation, greens and purples that shimmered like auroras underwater. Technicians whispered that objects had been lowered into the pools, not for cooling, but for containment. Most disturbing are the disappearances linked to reactor access. In 1961, 3 researchers entered the X-10 sublevels to perform a vault interface inspection. Only 2 returned. The missing man was written off as an accident victim, his file sealed. His family was told he died in a car crash. In the 1970s, Oak Ridge expanded with new reactor designs. Again, anomalies appeared. Power surges that didn't register on TVA's grid, unexplained outages, and spikes of radiation that faded as suddenly as they appeared. A declassified note from 1977 hints at what may have been happening. Reactor vault coupling unstable. Monitor for crossover phenomena. Crossover. The word suggests something more than a malfunction, something passing through using Oak Ridge's reactors as a doorway. Oak Ridge wasn't only about uranium. It became the birthplace of isotope production, manufacturing dozens of radioactive elements for medicine, research, and industry. By the 1950s, the facility proudly called itself the isotope capital of the world. But in the archives, a disturbing trend appears. Shipments of isotopes that were never received at their destinations. Official manifests show Oak Ridge producing rare isotopes, cobalt-60, cesium-137, strontium-90, and shipping them to hospitals and labs across the country. Most deliveries arrived, but scattered among the records are anomalies, shipments signed out of Oak Ridge that never appear in recipient logs. Whole crates vanish in transit. The missing material wasn't trivial. Some of the lost isotopes were among the most dangerous known, highly radioactive, requiring lead shielding and constant monitoring. Yet no recovery operations were ever reported. Instead, the paperwork trails end abruptly, stamped classified, vault allocation. Whistleblowers claim the isotopes didn't go missing at all. They were diverted. Oak Ridge allegedly funneled them into the hidden sublevels, feeding experiments never acknowledged publicly. One former chemist described lowering isotope canisters into chambers lined with copper and lead. They weren't for medicine, he said. They were for resonance tests. Whatever was down there, it reacted to them. Even stranger, technicians sometimes reported material that simply decayed too fast. Samples of isotopes vanished in days when they should have lasted years. Radiation logs show containers going from active to inert overnight, as if the material had been drained of its energy. One margin note in a declassified file offers a chilling theory: not lost. Absorbed, if true, Oak Ridge wasn't just producing isotopes, it was feeding them into something beneath its surface, something that consumed radiation like food, and perhaps that's why Oak Ridge's vaults remain sealed. Not to protect us from what's inside, but to keep it nourished, controlled, and hidden. For decades, Oak Ridge was presented as a city of science, a place where America's brightest minds built the atomic age. But according to whistleblowers, Oak Ridge was more than a city. It was a labyrinth. Construction crews who worked in the 1940s and 50s later admitted that Oak Ridge's foundations didn't stop at basements. Beneath the visible plants were sublevels, and beneath those sublevels were tunnels, miles of them carved into bedrock. Some were wide enough for trucks, others narrow service shafts. Many connected facilities miles apart, allowing shipments to move underground, unseen by the public. Officially, these tunnels were maintenance corridors and utility lines. Unofficially, they formed a maze of vault access points. Workers described hidden elevators descending to sealed floors, stairwells that ended at blank concrete walls, and corridors that looped back on themselves in impossible ways. It didn't feel built, one contractor said, it felt grown. Maps recovered from declassified archives show hints of this labyrinth. Dashed lines connect Y12, K25, and X10, forming a triangle beneath Oak Ridge. Within the triangle are circles labelled only restricted zone. No explanation is given. Even more unsettling are reports from security patrols. Guards claimed to hear footsteps in tunnels long after shifts ended. Others swore they saw shadows moving against the glow of their flashlights, shadows that didn't belong to anyone there. One engineer told of getting lost during a vault inspection. His team followed the map, turned left where instructed, and found themselves back where they started. The halls shifted, he said. There's no other way to explain it. Was Oak Ridge's underground labyrinth simply a web of tunnels? Or was it something else? Something designed to confuse, conceal, and perhaps even contain? Whatever its purpose, one thing is clear. The Oak Ridge most of us know is only the surface. Beneath it lies a hidden city, a network of corridors, vaults, and chambers built not just for war, but for secrets. Secrets still sealed away. For decades, Oak Ridge's vaults remained sealed, their contents unknown, but buried in scattered records and whispered testimony is evidence of a moment when containment failed. In 1989, Oak Ridge experienced what was officially described as a containment incident. The press release blamed a chemical spill, but multiple workers later claimed the truth was far stranger. One of the deep vaults was breached. Technicians recalled alarms blaring in the Y12 sublevels, followed by a facility-wide lockdown. Radiation monitors spiked, yet when hazmat teams arrived, they found no contamination. Instead, they reported something else, a structural rupture. A vault door had buckled outward, as if something inside had pressed until the metal gave way. The incident was classified immediately. Workers on duty that night were reassigned or silenced, yet rumours spread fast. Some said they saw a stretcher being carried out, the body covered with a lead-lined sheet. Others swore they heard a low, resonant hum fill the tunnels for hours afterward, so deep it shook their teeth. One whistleblower later claimed the vault had held anomalous material recovered during excavation. It wasn't nuclear, he said, it was older. It was alive. Supporting the story is a Department of Energy memo from 1990, partially declassified. It reads, "Vault breach confirmed. Loss contained. Recommend expansion of sublevel reinforcement. Do not re-engage with specimen. The word alone raises terrifying implications. Oak Ridge wasn't just storing isotopes, it was holding something, or someone, that should never have been unearthed. After the breach, Oak Ridge quietly increased funding for underground reinforcement. Entire neighbourhoods near the site were bought out, families relocated, and entrances sealed. The public explanation? Environmental remediation. But those who lived through it know better. The vaults were breached once, and what leaked out may never have fully gone back in. Today, Oak Ridge is no longer a secret city. It appears on maps, it hosts museums. Schoolchildren tour the X-10 reactor, learning about the dawn of the atomic age. The government insists its darker days are long past, that secrecy was a wartime necessity, nothing more. But the records tell a different story. Entire shipments unaccounted for. Sub-levels erased from blueprints. Radiation shadows, listening rooms, ghost convoys and vaults that were never meant to be seen. And above all, the breach. Residents who lived through the Cold War years still whisper about nights when the ground shook, when their windows rattled, when the city's lights went dark. They speak of guards who vanished, convoys that drove into hillsides, and strange humming in the air. Many of those voices have since fallen silent, whether by old age or by design. The Oak Ridge vaults remain sealed. Whatever lies within, the public will never be told. Official reports dismiss the rumors as conspiracy, the product of fear and secrecy. But ask yourself, would a nation build miles of underground labyrinths, guarded vaults, and sealed chambers simply to store uranium? Would it erase entire sections of history for nothing? A handful of declassified memos hint at the truth. They reference specimens, non-human directives, containment anomalies, words that don't belong in the vocabulary of nuclear science, words that suggest Oak Ridge was never just about splitting atoms. It was about something older, stranger, and perhaps far more dangerous. And that may be why Oak Ridge is quiet today. Too quiet. Beneath the friendly streets and public tours, the vaults remain, locked, waiting. The silence of Oak Ridge isn't peace, it's containment. The question is, how long can that silence hold? In the shadows of Oak Ridge's towering reactors and sprawling enrichment halls lies a place few outside the highest clearance levels have ever heard of, the archives. Officially, they were nothing more than secure storage vaults, repositories of technical manuals, blueprints and records from decades of nuclear research. But scattered fragments of testimony suggest the archives were not designed to preserve ordinary knowledge. They were built to bury dangerous knowledge, the kind that could never be safely destroyed. Some of the oldest records tell of a warehouse beneath the hills where shelves stretched for miles, lined with microfilm reels, sealed boxes and punched cards. Guards remembered the air inside feeling unusually heavy, as if static clung to the skin. Whistleblowers later claimed the archives contained infected documents, papers that carried something toxic, not radiation, but information. Certain blueprints were said to drive their readers into madness, their margins scribbled with cryptic diagrams by engineers who had since vanished. Memos stamped with the phrase mimetic containment hinted that words themselves might spread like contagion. One former guard described a night patrol in the late 1950s. Walking between endless shelves of boxed files, he swore he heard faint whispers. At first, he thought fellow guards were somewhere in the stacks. But when he turned a corner, the aisle was empty. The whispering, however, continued, low, indistinct, yet following him like a shadow. It wasn't men talking, he recalled decades later. It was the files themselves. They remembered being read. Other stories speak of crates locked in copper mesh, treated like radioactive waste, though they contained only paper. Some archivists refused to touch certain boxes, claiming the documents inside caused nosebleeds and migraines within minutes. One man recalled unsealing a file labelled only Directive Z Alpha. He didn't finish the first page before he collapsed in the aisle, trembling and incoherent. When he recovered hours later, the file was gone, and supervisors warned him never to speak of it again. Declassified fragments seem to support these claims. In one, a typed order instructs that infected diagrams be placed under triple containment, isolated from human contact. Another references vault contagion risk and the need for guards to rotate shifts no longer than 20 minutes. If these were just ordinary papers, why treat them like biological hazards? And yet, there's another layer. A handful of researchers believe the archives were more than storage. They were a trap. By locking away documents that could unravel minds, Oak Ridge ensured no enemy nation, no spy, and perhaps not even its own citizens could ever weaponize that knowledge. But if the files themselves were dangerous, then what did they describe? Technologies too advanced for the time? Maps of vaults not meant to exist? Or instructions written not by us? The archives are silent now. Most of the buildings that housed them have been turned into offices or museums. But deep under Oak Ridge, in tunnels never open to the public, the shelves remain. Dust covers the boxes. Copper mesh cages still hum faintly with static, and somewhere in those shadows, the whispers may still echo, waiting for someone reckless enough to listen. Every city has its map, but Oak Ridge's was never meant to be complete. Engineers who drew the original blueprints in the 1940s insisted on precision. Every hallway, every utility shaft, every stairwell was logged in ink. Yet when researchers decades later compared drafts to final releases, a troubling pattern emerged. Whole levels disappeared. Staircases once shown as connecting floors suddenly ended in blank walls. Corridors were redrawn as solid concrete. It was as though the city itself had erased pieces of its own anatomy. At first, historians assumed clerical error. After all, wartime secrecy created thousands of overlapping documents, many redacted or altered before release. But surviving engineers tell a stranger story. Some described living blueprints, diagrams that refused to stay fixed. One draftsman in 1945 recalled returning to his desk after a week's leave to find his careful pencilwork altered. The erasures weren't his. Whole sections were gone as though rubbed out by an invisible hand. When he asked his supervisor, he was told never to raise the question again. Survey crews decades later encountered the same puzzle underground. They walked hallways not marked on any plan, corridors built with the same materials, the same precision, yet absent from every official map. In some cases, doors led to stairwells that descended 2 or 3 levels before ending in seamless walls. Others looped back into themselves, creating paths that trapped inspectors in endless circles. One geologist studying Oak Ridge's bedrock reported something impossible: corridors cut directly into limestone that appeared polished smooth before human tools touched it. He wrote that the tunnels seemed to pre-exist construction, as if the architects were not the first to design them. His notes were confiscated. His report never resurfaced. Technicians who worked in these sublevels spoke of ghost corridors, places where geometry itself seemed unstable. Turn a corner and you might end up back where you started. Some even claimed the blueprints were not vanishing. They were being edited in real time, shifting to match a labyrinth that was still expanding beneath the city. It was like the ground was drawing itself, one worker confessed, and we were just there to keep up. Declassified fragments fuel the mystery. A memo from the 1960s warns of geometric drift in sublevel schematics, instructing engineers to update blueprints daily to reflect new alignments. Another, more chilling states, do not attempt to map beyond tolerance radius. Stability not guaranteed. If the records are to be believed, Oak Ridge's underground layers weren't static, they were alive. Theories abound. Some believe seismic activity slowly warped the tunnels, shifting their paths over time. Others argue that secret expansions created confusion, with deliberate erasures concealing sensitive vaults. But the whispers that persist among Oak Ridge's veterans hint at something stranger, that the vaults themselves were never finished because they are still being built, not by men with drills and concrete, but by something else beneath the soil. Today, the official blueprints displayed in Oak Ridge museums show a neat grid of corridors, orderly and rational. But the missing pages, the ones redacted, erased, or rewritten, paint another picture. A city with bones that move, hallways that rearrange, and vaults that seem to grow in silence. The map of Oak Ridge is not incomplete, it is unfinished, and perhaps it always will be. By the late 1970s, Oak Ridge was no longer just a nuclear hub. Quietly, it had become a listening post, not for enemy nations, but for something else entirely. Buried in fragments of declassified reports is mention of a project codenamed Deep Signal, a collaboration between Oak Ridge and NASA. Officially, the research concerned satellite relays and underground communication testing, but insiders whispered of stranger objectives, intercepting transmissions that did not originate from the surface. Technicians working on the project recalled installing sensors deep within the sublevels. These were no ordinary microphones or seismographs. They were designed to capture frequencies so low they bordered on infrasound, the kind more often felt than heard. For weeks, the sensors reported nothing unusual. Then, late one night, a pattern appeared. It wasn't random static, but a rhythm, like dots and dashes, rising and falling with mechanical precision. The technicians stared in disbelief. To them, it resembled Morse code, but no language they recognized. At first, supervisors insisted it was interference, machinery vibrations, geological noise, perhaps even distant traffic. But the pattern repeated night after night, consistent and deliberate. One technician, sworn to secrecy, later described it as a voice beneath the stone. When the team transmitted test pulses back into the vaults, the signals didn't just echo, they changed. The return pulse arrived distorted, altered, as though shaped into a reply. NASA's involvement was brief. By 1980, the project was terminated, its records sealed. Official explanations blamed faulty equipment and harmonic resonance anomalies, yet technicians claimed the signals continued even after the machines were dismantled. They swore they could still feel the vibrations through the floor, a steady pulse, like the heartbeat of something immense lying dormant below. A handful of declassified memos support their story. One refers to vault resonance harmonics matching non-terrestrial frequencies. Another chilling line, barely visible through redactions, reads, "Responsive pattern confirmed." Terminate project immediately. What could lie beneath Oak Ridge that produces signals structured like communication? Some theorists argue the city was built atop natural resonance chambers, caves that amplify seismic noise until it resembles a pattern. Others suggest secret Cold War experiments attempted to use the bedrock as a giant antenna, with unexpected results. But those who worked in the vaults whisper a darker possibility, that Oak Ridge was sitting on top of something not natural, not man-made, and not silent. One technician described how, after months of exposure, he began hearing the pulse even at home, faintly in the walls at night. Another claimed his dreams were filled with repeating patterns of sound, until he could almost understand them. Both men left the project soon after. Neither spoke publicly again. If the deep signal was real, it raises disturbing questions. Was Oak Ridge eavesdropping on something buried beneath its soil, or was the signal not a transmission at all, but a call, one that Oak Ridge answered when it pulsed the bedrock back? And if it was a conversation, what else might be listening still? The public sees Oak Ridge as quiet now, its Cold War urgency long past. But according to those who once sat in the dim glow of oscilloscopes, the silence is a lie. Deep beneath the hills, the signal continues, steady and patient, like a voice waiting for us to understand. For most residents of Oak Ridge, the sudden relocations were just another mystery in a city built on secrets. Officially, the government said neighborhoods were cleared for contamination control, modernization projects, or simple infrastructure expansion. Yet when locals looked closer, the patterns didn't add up. Streets weren't cleared at random. Whole clusters of homes were emptied overnight, sometimes entire neighborhoods bulldozed within weeks. The only constant was their proximity to restricted sublevels. Families recalled receiving relocation notices late in the evening, usually delivered by uniformed men. They were told to pack quickly, sometimes within 24 hours. Compensation was promised, but no appeals were allowed. Neighbors would wake the next morning to see moving trucks already gone, windows of familiar houses boarded, yards marked with spray-painted codes. Within days, bulldozers arrived, tearing everything down. And then came silence, the land fenced off, patrolled and labelled Environmental Remediation Zone. Yet records show no major contamination where many of these neighbourhoods stood. Radiation surveys decades later found nothing unusual. But when maps are overlaid, another pattern emerges. The vanished neighbourhoods formed rings around known vault entrances, as if the government was creating buffer zones, layers of distance between the public and something buried below. One of the most disturbing testimonies came from a former city clerk. She admitted that in the 1970s, she was asked to file paperwork for a wave of relocations, but the orders weren't marked under environmental. They were classified under zone expansion, civilian clearance. In the margin of one form, she saw the words containment radius. When she asked her supervisor what that meant, he closed the file and told her never to mention it again. Residents forced to leave often described strange activity in the weeks before their departure. They reported nights when the ground rumbled softly, not like an earthquake, but like something moving beneath the soil. Others remembered hearing low humming sounds carried on the night air, vibrations that made windows tremble even though no trucks or planes were nearby. Some families swore their pets refused to enter certain parts of their yards in those final days. What was being contained? Official documents remained silent, but the whispers among Oak Ridge veterans paint a chilling picture. Some believed the relocations weren't about protecting people from contamination, but about protecting people from proximity. That whatever stirred beneath the vaults had a range, and the government calculated how far it could reach. Anyone living within that invisible circle had to go. Satellite photos taken decades later show eerie scars where the neighborhoods once stood, perfectly cleared land that remains empty to this day. In some cases, the old streets still exist as faint lines in the soil like ghost maps leading nowhere. They aren't parks, they aren't redeveloped, they are voids, as if the land itself has been quarantined. If Oak Ridge was truly sealing its most dangerous vaults, then the relocations were not random acts of bureaucracy. They were part of an expanding perimeter, a containment zone growing outward as if the vaults beneath were slowly claiming more ground. For the families forced to leave, the reasons were never explained. They were told to go, and they went. And so, Oak Ridge shrank, not because of war or economics or modernization, but because something beneath demanded more room. A city eaten from within, its people pushed outward while silence settled over the abandoned earth. Even today, locals whisper that those empty zones aren't dead land. They're living boundaries, fences drawn not to keep us out, but to keep something else in. Oak Ridge's story is often told as history, an account of wartime urgency and Cold War secrecy. But for those who lived in its shadow, the secrecy never ended. Decades after the Manhattan Project, retired workers and their families began to speak quietly about what they called the inheritance. It wasn't money or land or even recognition, it was silence. A silence passed from one generation to the next, enforced by contracts, warnings, and the ever-present shadow of the vaults. One former machinist's daughter recalled how her father, shortly before his death, handed her a sealed envelope. Inside was a key, small, heavy, unmarked. No explanation came with it. He only told her, "This is your burden now. Don't use it." She kept it hidden for years, never daring to ask what lock it belonged to. Others told similar stories of receiving boxes from deceased relatives, boxes that contained keys, coded cards, or fragments of maps pointing to corridors that no longer appear on any plan. None of the heirs were given instructions. The inheritance was simply to hold these objects in silence. There were also pensions tied to loyalty clauses. Some retirees claimed they were approached by anonymous officials who reminded them of agreements signed decades earlier. If they broke silence, their pensions would vanish. One man said he was told plainly, "Your security clearance does not end with you. It passes to your bloodline." The implication was clear. The vaults were not merely guarded by soldiers or steel, they were guarded by families bound in silence. Whistleblowers hinted that this system was intentional. The government didn't just want vault secrets buried underground, it wanted them buried inside people, carried forward like a hereditary lockbox. To speak was to betray your own lineage. To remain silent was to uphold a chain of containment stretching back to the 1940s. But sometimes the silence cracked. A widow in the 1990s admitted that her husband often woke in the night, whispering numbers in his sleep, strings of digits that she wrote down before they faded. Later, when she compared them to old Oak Ridge maps, the numbers aligned with grid coordinates, locations deep in restricted zones. She destroyed the notes, terrified of what might happen if they were discovered. The strangest accounts involve what some heirs call the Watchers. These were men who appeared after funerals, quiet, well-dressed, never giving names. They would remind families that their loved one's work was classified and that responsibility had not ended with death. A chilling phrase recurred in several testimonies: "The vault is never abandoned. It is tended." The suggestion was that families weren't inheriting property, they were inheriting duty. If true, the vaults are not relics of history. They are living obligations, guarded not only by fences and concrete, but by the silence of those bound across generations. Oak Ridge is more than a city with secrets. It is a system designed to outlive its creators, a machine of containment maintained by the very people it once employed. And perhaps that is the final truth. The inheritance is not an object, not a key, not even a document. It is a vow, renewed every time someone chooses silence over revelation. Oak Ridge's vaults may still be locked, not because they are forgotten, but because their guardians never stopped watching. Even now, beneath the calm suburban streets, the vaults wait, silent, sealed, and inherited. For more than 80 years, Oak Ridge has been called America's secret city. But if what we've uncovered tonight is true, it was never just a secret. It was a vault not built to protect us from enemies abroad, but from something beneath our own soil. Think about the patterns: uranium shipments that vanish, isotopes absorbed like fuel, vaults buckling under pressure, blackout drills designed not for war, but for something waiting in the dark, all hidden under the quiet hills of Tennessee. The official story tells us Oak Ridge helped end a war, pioneered nuclear medicine, and carried America into the atomic age. But the missing pages hint at something else: non-human directives, specimens, anomalies that breathe, hum, and shift beneath our feet. And those vaults are still there, locked, silent, waiting. The real question isn't what Oak Ridge built in the past, it's whether those vaults are still holding today. Because if they ever fail again, the silence may break in ways we're not ready to face. If you believe these stories should be heard, help keep them alive. Subscribe to the channel, share this video with someone who questions the official record, and join the search for truth. Because history isn't finished, it's buried. And together, we're digging it back up. Stay curious, stay vigilant, and never stop asking what's really hidden behind the steel doors of Oak Ridge.